Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. Please sit with me in nature around the campfire and listen with me. Listen to the voice of the wind caressing mountains, valleys, canyons, deserts, and plains. Listen to the sun and the sky, the moon and the stars. The clouds and the storm have stories to tell us tonight. There will be many stories and myths from the Apache and Navajo peoples tonight. But apart from telling you stories, I will also tell you a little bit about these peoples, or groups of peoples to be more precise, their history, their culture, where they came from. But first, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. If you join, you will gain access to various new features. For example, you will have the option to listen to all episodes with and without background sounds and receive regular bonus episodes. We already offer 9 exclusive episodes to our patrons. The latest one about the Colossus of Rhodes. This is the second of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that we will explore, and once completed, they will all be edited together to create a 4-hour story. In addition, you will have the capability to download all these audios and participate in selecting future topics. This topic was selected by our patrons. We hope to see you there soon so that we can continue developing Lights Out Library, which we thoroughly enjoy. You will find a link in the description box and the first comment pinned under the video. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. We ask that if you can, please subscribe to the channel and click on the like button. This helps promote the channel and eliminate advertisements as much as YouTube allows us to. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now, assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now it's time to explore. And the first story is about the origins of the Apache people. There was a time when light did not exist. In the beginning, the world was covered in darkness. There was no sun and no day. The perpetually dark sky had no moon or stars. In this dark world, all manner of beasts and birds prospered. Among the beasts were many hideous monsters that did not even have names, as well as the ancestors of beasts that still populate our world: wolves, bears, foxes, and also much smaller beasts like beavers, rabbits, squirrels, rats, and mice. And on top of that, all sorts of creeping creatures such as lizards and snakes. There were humans too, but very few because they could not thrive in this world. The beasts destroyed their offspring and denied them access to the land. And so humans lived in fear, in caves that were even darker than the outside. The birds were not as ferocious and dangerous as the beasts, and as more elevated beings, they were organized. They held councils and they obeyed their chief, the eagle. In these ancient times, both birds and beasts had the power of speech, and for eons, the world stayed like this. The birds dominated in the dark sky, the beasts dominated on the dark earth, and a few humans survived, living in terror of being found and eaten. And one day, it happened that the birds became curious about what the world would be if there was light in it. They wanted light admitted, and so they sent an embassy to the beasts to discuss the transformation of the world, the replacement of darkness with light. The beasts liked the world as it was, and they refused. The agreement of birds and beasts was needed for the light to be invited, and because they could not obtain it by diplomacy, the birds resorted to war. They declared war on the beasts. The beasts were stronger. Some were enormous and apparently invincible, and others were tiny. They could hide and attack by surprise. But the eagle armed the birds with bows and arrows so that they could attack at a distance, and they could also escape by flying. Or they could drop stones from above onto the heads of the bigger beasts. After many days of ferocious and uncertain fighting, the birds prevailed. Once the surviving beasts had accepted defeat in this war, they saw many of them disappear forever. The birds could impose their decision. The light was admitted to the world, and all creatures, the birds, the beasts that had survived, and humans who emerged from their caves for the first time, they all saw the beauty of nature and marveled at the world they lived in. Mankind could finally live in the open, and it began to prosper. But men did not forget they owed their newfound freedom to the birds, and especially their chief, the eagle. They started wearing his feathers as emblems of wisdom, justice, and power. Among human beings who lived during this era of access to the illuminated world, there was a woman who had many children, but none of them had survived because they had been taken by the beasts. Mankind could now inhabit the surface, but men remained prey to the remaining wolves, bears, serpents, and the most feared of all beasts, the dragon. One day this woman had another son, and she refused to lose him like she had lost the others. So she dug a cave deep in the ground to conceal her baby, and she closed the entrance and built a campfire over the spot so that her son would be kept warm and hidden from the beasts, especially from the dragon, who was very evil but also astute and constantly hungry. Every day she would remove the fire and descend into the cave to nurse her child. Then she would return to the surface and rebuild the campfire. The dragon was suspicious and always on the hunt for human children. He would frequently come and question her, asking where her children were. The only reason he did not eat her was that she could produce more babies. But the woman was brave, and despite the terror of the dragon, she never revealed the existence of her son, always swearing that she had no more children and that the dragon had already eaten all of them. Thanks to her efforts, the child could grow in his cave for several years. Her son kept growing, turning from toddler to child to adolescent. But it happened one day that the dragon saw his tracks, and this enraged the monster because he could not find the place where the boy was hidden. He threatened to kill the mother if she didn't reveal where her son was. But the woman again refused to give up her child. She decided he would no longer be allowed to go out of his cave out of fear she would lose him like the others. When she descended into the cave and told her son, the boy refused to stay underground forever, and he said that instead he would go hunting. There was no stopping him. He told his mother that living in hiding and afraid was not living, and that come what may, he would go out into the wilderness and live and breathe the air and enjoy the light. She argued that outside there were wolves, the bears, the serpents, and even worse, the dragon, which was already looking for him. But his decision was made. On the following day, he asked his uncle, one of the few men who populated the earth at the time, to accompany him and give him weapons so that he could hunt. The uncle made a little bow and some arrows for the boy, and the two went hunting. They found the tracks of a deer and followed them across the plain, across the river, through canyons, and finally up a mountain until they found him. Here they found their prey. The boy took his little bow and shot. This was his first success as a hunter, and they rejoiced. His uncle showed him how to prepare and cook the meat on a fire. But as they were preparing their meal, the huge form of the dragon suddenly appeared. The most feared, the most terrifying of all beasts that never let prey escape, had finally found them. The uncle was petrified, but maybe due to his natural bravery or his innocence, the boy was not afraid. The dragon could have eaten him on the spot, but instead, after all those years of looking for this particular boy that he had found for the first time, the dragon decided to take his time and enjoy his triumph. The dragon took the meat they were preparing and declared that he would eat the meat, and then the boy. But instead of being terrified and begging for his life, as humans usually did, the boy walked to the dragon, took back the meat, and declared that this was his, and that the dragon would certainly not eat him or his uncle. The dragon was astonished at this bravery or foolishness. He didn't know which one it was. He thought the boy was probably mad. He retook the meat, but so did the boy. 4 times the piece of meat changed hands. Finally, the boy asked the dragon if he would fight him. The monster laughed and said yes, in whatever way the little man would like. The dragon was huge and protected by 4 coats of horn. Nothing would hurt such a monster, so he didn't worry at all that he could be defeated. The boy offered the following duel rules. They would stand at 100 steps from each other, and the dragon would be allowed to shoot 4 times at the boy with its enormous bow and arrows. If the boy survived, they would exchange places, and the little man would have 4 shots at the dragon. The dragon laughed and accepted this little game that he couldn't lose. He took his bow, which was made of an entire pine tree, and his quiver of arrows. Each of the arrows was a pine tree sapling, and they were 20 feet long. The dragon took aim and soon learned that the boy was small and quick. He could avoid the deadly arrow once, twice, 3 times, and finally 4 times. Then the boy said it was now his turn to shoot. The dragon was mildly annoyed that the boy was still alive, but the rules were the rules, so they exchanged places. With its 4 coats of horn, there was no risk at all that the small arrow could even scratch his skin. Hitting the huge dragon was easy, but the boy knew that his little arrows were no match for this huge armored enemy unless he could shoot just at the right place, near the heart and between the scales. He shot the first arrow that landed exactly where he intended, near the heart, and the dragon's outer coat of horn fell to the ground. Then the second shot destroyed the second coat, and a third also hit its target. The dragon was now trembling because, should the 4th shot hit again, it would pierce his heart, and the tiny human would win. Dragons were evil, but they were still bound by their word, and the monster was now at the boy's mercy. The boy shot the 4th time, and the arrow pierced the dragon's heart. With a tremendous roar, the dragon rolled down the mountainside into the canyon below. The order of nature had suddenly changed. A tiny human with agility and precision had defeated the most powerful of beasts. Storm clouds swept the mountain. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the rain poured. The world would never be the same again. The age of humans was beginning. This boy's name was Apache, and he was destined to become the first chief of men. Our next story is a creation myth of the Kiowa Apache from the Southern Plains. It does not necessarily connect to the first story because it is one of multiple traditions and storylines that exist among the Apache bands or tribes. Here is the story of Kuterastan, the creator. His name means one who lives above. In the beginning, before there was earth or sky, or even longer before there were plains or forests and mountains and deserts, and also long before there were winds, rain, rivers, and lakes, there was only darkness. Until one moment when in the darkness appeared a small and thin disk, and inside this disk was a small bearded man, no larger than a frog. Kuterastan, that was his name. He was without past. He didn't even know the concept of time, but he was a creative force called into existence to shape the world from his tiny disk. After he awakened and rubbed his eyes, he looked above him into the infinite darkness. And by the powers that he had, the darkness above filled with light and illuminated the darkness below, separating this world into two halves, above and below the disk. Then he rubbed his eyes again and looked to the east. The eastern night took the yellow color of dawn, and after that he looked west. The western night was immediately shaded by the power of his look with the amber tones of dusk. As he danced around himself, clouds of different colors appeared. Then again, Kuterastan rubbed his eyes and face. As he flung the sweat from his hands, a very small cloud appeared, with a tiny little girl, even smaller than him, on top of it. Her name was Stenatlia, which means the woman without parents. Kuterastan and Stenatlia started talking, and for the first time, words were spoken in this world that was still dressed in light above and darkness below. Yellow light in the east and amber light in the west, and a few clouds around them. The two spoke, puzzled about the question of who they were, where they came from, and wondering what this world was and what was going to happen, unaware that they would be the source of what was going to happen to the world. After thinking for some time, again, Kuterastan rubbed his eyes and face and then rubbed his hands together. When he opened them, his sweat flew, and two new beings appeared from it. The first one was Chugana'ai, the sun, and the second, Hadintinskin, meaning pollen boy. The two new entities were as puzzled and ignorant of the primordial energy they embodied as Kuterastan and Stenatliha were. The four of them sat a long time in silence on a cloud, meditating. Again, Kuterastan broke the silence and asked what they should do to make this existence, this world, more habitable and filled with meaning. The purpose was emerging, the creation of the world. The four of them, whom humans would later call gods, started this creation by giving birth to more entities. Led by Kuterastan, the four created Nacholecho, the tarantula, who would weave and help them. They made the Big Dipper, who stood next to them, and then the wind, lightning, and thunder. Each was given characteristic tasks that made the world richer, more alive, and more wonderful. But however entertaining this creation was, they still lived on the ground they grew bored of. It was a poor home. So they turned their attention to making an earth that would be a much more suitable place to inhabit for them, their creations, and the ones to come, too. The four gods mixed their sweat in Kuterastan's palms. He rubbed his hands again, and a small brown ball emerged from them. It was no bigger than a bean, but like the tiniest of seeds that can give birth to giant trees, this smooth ball was just the beginning. The gods expanded the ball by kicking it, and then they let the wind inside it to inflate it. The earth grew bigger and bigger, much, much bigger than the gods who created it. Nacholecho, the tarantula, attached the black cord to the ball and pulled it far to the east where the yellow light of dawn shined. Then a blue cord was pulled to the south, a yellow cord to the west, and a white cord to the north. All were pulled to these 4 points, and the earth expanded again, becoming a vast expanse of smooth brown plains. When the tarantula god was finished, Kuterastan had poles placed at each corner to hold the earth in place, allowing the world to sit still. The gods had begun to sing as they created, and the joy of seeing the world take shape in all the ways they imagined inspired their songs, which in return also shaped the world. The creation also sprang from songs that the gods invented. Each new thing came with a new song. After the earth had been stretched and made to sit still, Kuterastan began another song referring to the sky. He felt there ought to be one to embrace the earth, and 4 times he chanted this new sky song. At the end of the 4th time, he spread his hands wide before him, and the sky appeared, embracing earth in every direction. On earth, the landscape was being shaped by winds, waters running through the plains, by the creativity of the 4 gods and their offspring. They all contributed to shape this new world with songs and dances. One day, the lightning maker, one of Kuterastan's children, returned with 3 beings that he had found in the sky. These were just shapes, 2 girls and a boy, with limbs like gods, but no eyes, ears, hair, mouth, nose, or teeth. Though they had arms and legs, they lacked fingers and toes. They were like an unfinished draft, resembling the shape of the gods. Maybe they had accidentally appeared from one of their creation works, or another entity had put them there. This was, is, and will remain a mystery. Enthusiastically, the 4 gods decided to finish them, which would require a lot of sweat and inspiration. They had a sweat house built on earth, and they closed it with clouds. When they had enough sweat, The woman without parents, Stenatliha, used it to shape the beings. She made them fingers and toes, mouth and eyes and ears, hair and nose. When she was done, Kuterastan welcomed them to creation. The boy was made Sky Boy, chief of the sky and its people. The first girl was made Earth Daughter and placed in charge of the earth and its crops. The second girl was called Pollen Girl and assigned the care of the health of the earth people. The earth could now be populated, and new songs began from all these voices. The first gods and their offspring sang, creating all sorts of animals on earth, in the rivers and the lakes, birds in the sky, and in the last creation song, women and men, their children. These first two creation stories are just two of many more myths and legends that were transmitted for generations within Apache tribes. But who are the Apache? They are not a single people, but a quite large group of different bands and tribes. Not that large by population. There would be a bit more than 100,000 individuals in this group nowadays, but large by the area where they used to live in the southern United States, and large by their number of communities of bands and tribes. Chiricahua, Jicarilla, Lipan, Mezcalero, Salinero, Arabaipa, Pinaleño, and there are more. There are all different tribes that lived and still live from Texas and Oklahoma to Arizona. People from these tribes have also migrated to cities all across the United States, especially in the 20th century, and some live abroad. But this is still where many Apache live, and especially those most connected to their ancestral culture. So why do these different tribes form a larger group? Because they are culturally and historically related. They share the same language group called the Apachean, or Southern Athabascan group. Athabascan is a large family of indigenous languages in North America that extends far beyond the American Southwest. It is also present in Alaska, in Western Canada, on the Pacific coast of the United States, in Oregon and Northern California, and in the Southwest, including in the north of Mexico. It doesn't mean that speakers of these many languages that belong to the Athabascan family can't understand each other, but the languages they speak have a common origin, possibly a single common ancestor language, and over centuries of migrations and cultural exchange with other groups, growing distances between speakers caused these languages to form, and they keep changing when they are still spoken. That is what languages do. It is not known precisely when the Apache populated the American Southwest. Their arrival is estimated to be sometime between 800 and 500 years ago. Long before they arrived, there were other Native American peoples in the Southwest, some of whom had a sedentary lifestyle. They built many villages and left plenty of archaeological remains that could be dated. For example, in a previous story I told you about Mesa Verde, a dwelling in Colorado left by the ancestral Pueblo culture. But the Apache were mostly nomads, and it is believed that they originated from regions that are now in Canada. This fits with the presence of the Athabascan language family up north in Canada and as far as Alaska. Actually, this group that would have migrated to the south, reaching regions of plains, deserts, and mountains that were very different from the places they came from. This group, or this migration wave, would have spread over several American states. And there would have been variances. Another major cultural group born from the same migration became a neighbor to the Apache in the eastern neighborhood, the Navajo. Culturally, they are distinct enough that overall the Navajo adopted a more settled lifestyle, planting crops and practicing herding, whereas more Apache lived a nomadic life. But that was not systematic. The Apache had different types of housing. In the plains, teepees were common, that is to say, conical tents made with wooden poles and animal skins. In the highlands, they built wickiups or wigwams, which are domed dwellings that are semi-permanent. They could be used for a longer time and were not made to be disassembled and transported like teepees. In the desert of northern Mexico, they built hogans, which are earthen structures that are also typical of the Navajo. These regions where they arrived were not empty. They found other peoples there. We don't know exactly what happened then, if they fought, forced by others to leave, if they mixed with existing populations, or maybe a bit of all of this. By the end of the 16th century at the latest, possibly before, they were established in the American Southwest region and the north of Mexico. They shared this very large space with other peoples, like the Pueblo peoples, whom they traded with. Both Apache and Navajo were not affected by the first decades of European colonization in America, as they were too far away. The first contact and clashes happened in the 17th century, initially with the Spaniards who came from Mexico, and on a much larger scale in the 19th century with the United States, which was expanding to the west at the time. Intermittent war occurred between Apache bands and the U.S. Army between 1849 and 1886, almost 40 years. The most famous figure of this conflict was Goyankla, also known as Geronimo, who was a leader and medicine man, a healer and a spiritual leader. He rose to fame because he participated in many raids over more than 30 years against interests and troops of Mexico and the United States. The Apache had been confined to reservations after the United States took possession of this region following the war against Mexico. And these reservations no longer permitted them to live the kind of free-moving lifestyle that was their customary way of life. So, over the years, hundreds of Apache joined Geronimo in breakouts from the reservation to launch raids. Though never on a very large scale, at any time he commanded only a few dozen men, but for a long time he tried to keep the flame of independence alive for the people who had been displaced and forced to live in reservations much smaller than their traditional territories. He was finally taken prisoner in 1886 and spent the rest of his life as such, not in a cell but under watch, until his death in 1909. His capture in 1886 is generally considered to be the end of the Apache conflict. After that, the intensity of raids was much less, but still, it wasn't until the 1920s that the cycle of raids and counter-raids involving the Apache finally ended. The Navajo were cultural cousins of the Apache. Though they are different cultures and societies, they settled in the same regions and their languages have common roots. There are more than 400,000 Navajo, and they have a creation myth called the Diné Bahaneʼ, literally the story of the people. Navajo call themselves the Diné, the people, and their story is extraordinary. So let's explore the story of the Diné Ta, the homeland, which is where the Navajo live, but not the only world to have ever existed. Our world is actually the fourth and final world, and many things happened before the first human arrived here, many, many generations ago. It all began with the first world. First world was small and simple. It was entirely black and made of 4 different seas. Where the seas met, there was a single island where a single pine tree grew. The only inhabitants of this first world were the air spirit people, ants, beetles, dragonflies, locusts, and bats. No one ever knew whether this world existed for an eternity or maybe just a heartbeat. But it happened that a cloud formed above each of the 4 seas. There was a black cloud, a white cloud, a yellow cloud, and a blue cloud, and the wind began to blow. The blue and yellow clouds came together in the west, and as they mixed, first woman was formed. At the same time, the black and white clouds came together in the east, and they mixed. First man appeared. Each of them had appeared with a stone. From the blue and yellow clouds, the turquoise formed, and it was owned by the woman. From the white and black clouds, a crystal had also formed, and it was owned by the man. Using their stones, each of them made a fire in their respective corner of this small, dark world. And for the first time, light appeared. This light was the awakening of the mind. For the first time, this dark world, thoughts and feelings came into existence. As the clouds rose higher in the sky, first man and first woman saw each other's fires in the distance. They were intrigued and searched for each other. Guided by their light, and they met. They decided to stay together in this world where everything complemented something else. But this harmony didn't last. Another being, Great Coyote, formed in the water of the 4 seas and appeared near them. He declared that he knew everything that was under the water and in the sky, and that he owned the knowledge. And yet a 4th being soon appeared. Another coyote named First Angry, who declared he was older than the other 3 and knew witchcraft. The 4 of them began to argue, bringing disharmony into the world. Like a plague, Disharmony extended to the air spirit people, the ants, the beetles, the dragonflies, the locusts, and the bats. They also became jealous of each other and began to fight. The island at the center of the four seas had turned to chaos and war. The spirits of the forces could stand it no more and demanded all these beings to leave their world. There was an opening in the sky in the east, and flying or climbing, all the inhabitants of the first world escaped. They crawled through the passage in the sky and left the first world, the dark world, forever. The insects, the man, the woman, and the two coyotes entered the second world. The second world was as blue as the first was dark. The newcomers began to explore it, and they found blue plains, blue rivers, and blue mountains. Finally, they found the inhabitants. There were bluebirds and blue hawks, blue jays, and many blue furry animals. The masters of the second world were the swallow people, all birds who welcomed the newcomers to share their world, where harmony ruled. It was decided that air spirit people and swallow people would live together as a single tribe. First man, first woman, and the two coyotes were also allowed to stay with them. For 23 days they all lived together and treated each other as members of the same tribe. But on the 24th day, one of the air spirit people approached the wife of the swallow people's chief and asked to sleep with her. The wife accepted, and on the following day, her husband found out. He complained that the foreigners had been treated as equals and with kindness, but had been ungrateful and treacherous. Even though they had been given a second chance, these air spirit people were still not living in balance and harmony, and so they had to leave this world. Like in the first world, signs appeared, fights ensued, and the offended swallow chief demanded all that did not belong to this world to leave it. There was an opening in the sky to the south, and the air spirit people, the man, the woman, the coyotes, and the blue beings who disagreed passed through it. They went into the third world. The third world was as yellow as the second world was blue. The third world teemed with life. There were animals they had never seen before, like antelopes and deer, turkeys and squirrels. It also had 2 rivers that crossed in its center, and in its corners were sacred mountains. In the east was White Dawn Mountain, in the south was Blue Turquoise Mountain, and there were also Yellow Mountain and Black Mountain. On these mountains lived 4 holy people who were immortal, one on each mountain. The third world was welcoming, and the refugees from the first and second world settled there, happy for this new opportunity to begin a new life. First man and first woman built their home and settled near the place where the rivers crossed. The 4 holy people tolerated the newcomers into their world, and one day they visited the man and woman. They asked them to cleanse themselves because they would soon return. The 2 obeyed and bathed carefully. When holy people returned, they performed a ritual that transformed first man and first woman. Until then, they had been spirit people who were born from nature in the first world. They were, in essence, a potential that had not yet taken material shape. The ritual transformed them into human beings with great powers. The holy people instructed them to live as husband and wife, to explore their new flesh and reproduce. And they did. The man and the woman had several pairs of twins, and time passed in the third world. They learned weaving from two creatures that also lived near the crossing of the rivers, Spider Woman and Spider Man. Their children and then their children's children formed a village where they all lived in balance and harmony. Until one day, when First Woman complained that while men went hunting and making tools, women did all the work. They gathered the food and tended to the fields. They could live without men for sure. First Man grew angry and called all the other men. He told them that the women thought they could live without them and that it was time to show them they would be miserable without men. And so the men decided to leave and live on the other side of the river, with everything they had invented and made, the axes and hoes. For 4 years, men and women lived separately and grew increasingly unhappy. Each side survived, but they had less food and more work to do. The men lacked new clothes, and the women missed meat. They all longed for each other. A reconciliation finally happened between First Man and First Woman, and the two sides reunited. All women had crossed on the raft, except for a mother and her 2 daughters who tried to cross by swimming. But the spirit of the river captured them and took them to their house in the waters, where they would keep company to his own children. The humans soon realized that the 2 girls were missing, and they began to look for them. After a long search which gave no results, they concluded that these girls must be kept prisoner under the river. And so they swam there to retrieve them. Under the waters, they found the house of the spirit of the river and the girls inside. But they were accompanied by First Angry, the coyote, who had introduced anger and witchcraft to the world. First Angry took the children of the spirit of the river with him, stealing them. The men didn't know that, and they began celebrating because the lost girls were returned. But on the following day, when they all woke up, they saw all sorts of animals running in panic in every direction. The black insects and bats from the first world, the bluebirds and fairy animals of the second world, and the antelopes, the deer, and the squirrels from the third world. They announced that a wall of water was coming from all corners of the world. The wrath of the river spirit would soon submerge the yellow world under a flood. They all ran to the mountains where the holy people lived to ask for help. One of them, Turquoise Boy on the Blue Mountain, gave First Man a reed and told him to plant it, and so it was done. The reed was planted on the top of the mountain, and it grew quickly to the sky where there was an opening. All people from the 3 worlds, humans and the holy people, climbed to escape the tide that would soon submerge everything, and they arrived in the 4th world, the white world. The refugees had arrived in the middle of a lake in a world populated by beasts. They arrived in this world with all the experience and knowledge they had acquired in the previous worlds. It was decided that this new world would be shaped by the holy people and first man and first woman. They would recreate the mountains from the third world with soil and add the colors they had known along their journey. In this world, they would also add the sun, the moon, the stars, and the seasons, modeling the white world into the world we know today. But it wasn't only wisdom and balance they had brought with them. First Angry, the coyote, had crossed to the fourth world too, and they ran into problems because of him. First Angry resented the men and the holy people for not including him in their plans. And so, with the jealous and chaotic nature he was born with, he tried to derail their plans. The truth was that no one trusted him, so he was not informed of their projects for the world. This is why he decided to ruin them as much as he could. When the patterns of the sun, the moon, the night, the sky, and the seasons had been designed, they were perfectly harmonious. Day and night would mark the time for work, life, rest, and sleep. The seasons would indicate when to plant food and harvest. The harmony of celestial bodies would keep harmony, like a mirror between beings in the world. The coyote could not destroy all this creation, but he could spoil it. He disrupted the path of the sun and the path of the moon, so that instead of being synchronized, the 12 months of the sun would be 13 months of the moon. He disrupted the seasons so that sometimes frost would come early and sometimes remain late. Sometimes the rains would come and other times they would not. And all the creatures of the world would be at the mercy of whimsical weather. There would never be absolute peace, certainty, and harmony in human lives. Their harvests would never be guaranteed. Coyote was also responsible for the fact that true death came into existence into the world. One day he threw a stone into a lake and declared that if it sank, then the dead would go back to the previous world and never exist again in our world. Of course, the stone sank, and death became the fate of every living being. The people were mad at him for what he had done, and they went to find him with the intention to beat him. But he spoke and said that he had actually saved the world, because it would soon have been overpopulated and unlivable if no one ever disappeared. It was only fair that generations would not exist all at the same time. The people had to admit that there was some wisdom in this, and they understood that the world could not be just fixed and perfectly still and in harmony. Otherwise, there could be no life. Instability, unpredictability, and even death were maybe part of a greater balance. And of this greater balance that made our world, First Angry, the coyote, that some would be inclined to call evil or chaos, maybe was a necessary part. Once humanity and the creatures from all the 4 worlds that had lived in the 4th world had settled, the time when history would begin had arrived. It was not the end of wonders or heroes. There would be monsters to slay and new extraordinary creatures to see the light of day. There would be times of exile, cold, poverty, and hunger. The history of the Navajo, the history of the people, was ready to begin. We've come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep. Or if you are not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.